Hey class, welcome back to World History 2. I hope you're all doing well today. In our PowerPoint lecture today, we'll be focusing in on Nation Building Part 2, where we'll be looking at the Israelites and a movement called Zionism, and then the establishment of Italy. Stay tuned for the PowerPoint. This is Part 2 of the 19th century nation building in Europe. This is our second PowerPoint lecture. Okay, as I mentioned in the beginning, we're going to be talking about the Israelites and the Italians today. The first here is 19th century Israelites, and this is important because of what takes place in Europe during the 19th century to the Jews, and that will flow into the First World War, and then definitely flow into the Second World War. Just a quick synopsis. The Israelites, the Jewish people, were not liked in Europe. They were looked at with disdain. They were persecuted. They were scattered. They were everywhere. And basically, they were a people without a homeland and persecuted. When the First World War starts, the Jewish people, they enlisted. They joined up. They went to fight for their country because it was a world war, and what were they going to be doing? So there were Russians that fought, Jewish Russians that fought on the Russian side. There were Jewish Austrians that would fight. There were Jewish Germans that would fight. There were Jewish French that would fight. There were other national Italians. These were Jewish people. But they fought for their country during the First World War because these countries were basically calling for every man to come join up to fight their enemy. And it was such a bloodletting on the fields of battle in the First World War that they needed every body that they could get, and so the Jews would fight. Well, then after World War I ended, and the war reparations were put on Germany, especially with the war guilt clause, the German people wanted a scapegoat. And so who did they blame? They blamed the Jews. And this would be a major factor that would head into the Jewish persecutions in Germany during the early Nazi government all the way up until the start of the Holocaust in the 1940s. So you really start to see now why there's an importance to look at the Israelites in the 19th century, because there's almost kind of a domino effect that takes place for the Jews. So just an overview of the situation for the Israelites. As nationalism grew, fear of minorities also grew. Okay, so when you're German and you're a pure-blooded German and your city-state has joined together in the Deutsche Bund, and then it goes into the actual country of Germany, comes together in the country of Germany, and the person is a full-blooded German, and they're just very proud of this. They look at the Jewish person who is a minority with fear and with disdain. Jews were everywhere, but they did not have their own state or homeland. They inhabited all nations within Europe as these nations began to have a national identity. And national leaders distrusted minorities. And it wasn't just the Jews. There were other minorities that they did not trust. Even minority nation groups within their countries they did not trust. And also certain other people, such as gypsies, they wouldn't trust. But definitely the Jews were a big target. Suspicion of Jews fueled anti-Semitism across Europe. And so anti-Semitism, I gave you a definition there, as hostility or prejudice against Jews. That's what that means, anti-Semitism. Okay, here's some magazines and newspapers images from the 19th century. And as you can see there, the Jew is stereotypically portrayed. Long sideburns, a big fat hook nose, big ears that kind of flop out, just big hands. Just not an accurate portrayal of a Jew. It's just stereotypical, and they would use this in their propaganda to bring disdain and violence towards Jews, especially from the populace. The one on the right, you can see how this Jew is portrayed almost like a monster, has some kind of hairy arms, body, hands with claws. Look what it's grabbing the money out of the chest. You see a big hook nose again, the big curved flappy ears, big bulging eyes. These are propaganda pictures that would just put the Jewish person in people's minds as someone to fear, as someone to stay away from, as someone you can't trust. Like, this guy's greedy, he wants your money. Okay, there's some more here. This is a publication in France on the left where the Jewish person is spreading all around the globe. Money in their pocket. Again, the big nose, bulging eyes, big hands, just clawing onto everything. You see money falling out from under his feet. So just this idea of the Jew being a danger to your country, even to the world. They want to control you. And then the one on the right is Jewish man. And this is the Dreyfus affair, which will be coming up. I'll talk about that in a second. Who was a French Jewish soldier who was charged with treason or spying. And so here you see him. He's got a body of a snake with other snakes coming off of him, and says traitor with a knife through it. And he's got the head of Dreyfus. Just very, very negative, very hard to kind of look at that this is how the Jews were portrayed. Okay, so in the 19th century, we have these attacks on Jews that are called pogroms. A pogrom. This is anti-Semitism, which often turned violent, especially in Eastern Europe. In Russian-controlled Poland and Russia, violence climaxed in a series of pogroms. And a pogrom, I have a definition there, a pogrom is an organized massacre of an ethnic group. Okay, so from 1881 to the early 20th century, thousands of Jews were slaughtered and property seized in these pogroms. There's maps you can look at on the internet or whatever of Eastern Europe, and it has the locations of pogroms, and they are just all over the place. They're the cities and the towns. The people rose up against the Jews and would beat them and kill them and take them out in the woods and kill them and leave the bodies there. Just an organized massacre to get rid of the Jews. Of course, this is not on the scale of the Holocaust during the Second World War under the Nazis, but this is just other times of persecution in the 19th century. Persecutions throughout the rest of Europe, and then millions of Jews moved to other areas of Europe, or they migrated to the United States. So a lot of Jews actually came to the United States, coming into New York City and New York Harbor, Statue of Liberty. Give us your huddled masses. So a lot of Jews did migrate to the United States, basically saving their lives. Here's just a wood cutting or an image of a pogrom. This here's the Jew right here in the center. Okay, so you see kind of his hook nose, and they obviously have their hands on him. They have weapons, and they're after him. Notice back here the police. This would be the police up here on the horses. They're kind of like turning a blind eye. They don't see anything. The next event that I want to talk to you about is the Dreyfus affair. Anti-Semitism was not as severe in France. The Jews were in France. There were Jews in France, and there was anti-Semitism, but not as severe as the Eastern countries. But it did come to the limelight over a military spy. Okay, his name was Alfred Dreyfus. He was a French army officer of Jewish descent. And what happened was he was arrested and convicted by a military court for spying for Germany. Now, the thing is that this case was never proved. He was actually innocent. If you believe in innocent until proven guilty, he was innocent. And he was never proven guilty. But he was convicted of this, and many people believe it was because he was Jewish. He ended up having the charges dismissed during an appeal. But what happened was he became the focus of a bitter debate about the trustworthiness of the Jews. And the trial really became a key focus of a term called Zionism. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So that's the Dreyfus Affair. Okay, there's Alfred Dreyfus. Okay, here's a magazine cover of the trial of the Dreyfus Affair. Okay, so Zionism, or the Zionism movement. Jews are a nation and deserve a homeland of territory. That is what the Zionist movement basically said. That was their goal, that the Jews are a people group, they're a national group, and they deserve to have their own homeland or territory. And the leader of this was Theodore Herzl, and he was a Jewish journalist in Vienna, Austria. And he witnessed a mob shouting death to Jews. Now, the unique thing, or the ironic thing, is that Austria, especially Vienna, was a city that had really embraced Enlightenment ideals, the power of the man, the freedom of individuals, life and liberty. Well, he's in Vienna and he's hearing people say death to Jews, and he's basically saying, how can these Enlightenment ideals be for some people but not for others, even though they're supposed to be for everybody? He realized that anti-Semitism was persistent in human society, basically because society is made up of anti-Semitic people. And so you're not going to get rid of it. It's almost like ingrained in the society of Europe to be against the Jew. And so he said the only solution is for the Jews to have their own homeland. There's Theodore Herzl, picture of him. In 1896, he published a writing called Judenstaat, and he argued that the only solution was for Jews to migrate out of Europe and to their own homeland. A year later, 1897, was the first Zionist conference in Basel, Switzerland, and at this conference, he founded the World Zionist Organization. And this organization, the World Zionist Organization, had a basic platform. This is basically what they said. Zionism seeks to establish a home for Jewish people in Palestine, which was the location of the ancient kingdom of Israel. So they basically are saying, we will leave Europe if we can go and migrate and settle in Palestine. Over the next 50 years, Jews did start to trickle down out of Europe and go into Palestine, which, if you look at a map, it's kind of where Israel is today. And this, again, this is all connected. It's going to be very important because during the 19th century, up until World War I, the Ottomans controlled Palestine. Okay, and the Ottomans are Muslim. World War I and after, Great Britain would control that area, which is important because the Ottomans, they controlled Palestine during World War I, but they fell apart. The Ottoman Empire dissolved, and basically they lost their control over the Palestinian region, and Great Britain then controlled it, especially after World War I. And then in 1948, Israel becomes a sovereign nation. Between World War I and 1948, Great Britain controlled Palestine, but that was actually a theater of war. There was war during the Second World War in Palestine. 1948, Israel becomes a sovereign nation. That's the year that Israel was founded as a country, same one today. There's been turmoil to the present day because of displaced Arab Palestinians, and they've been displaced by the Jews because many of the Jews, again, thinking about Herzl's idea, they ended up migrating, especially when it turned into British control, migrating to the Palestinian region. Okay, and so these places you may have heard in the news recently is the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, Golan Heights. These are areas of Israel, and you can see here on this little map. So this is Israel today, and you can see Israel is this kind of orangish color. All right, and then this is the Palestinian-controlled areas, which is the Gaza Strip, which is this little piece of land along the Mediterranean down here. Not very big. You see the scale is 25 miles, so it's not a very big. I mean, you can just see Israel's not a very big country at all. But you have the Gaza Strip. You have the West Bank, and the West Bank is, the way it gets that name, it's the West Bank of the Jordan River. So here's the Jordan River. It's the West Bank of that. And so you see, this is the West Bank. This is controlled by Palestinians who are Muslim. And then they actually have part of Jerusalem also. And obviously Israel here is Jewish. So you have Muslims, and you have Jewish. And then up here is the Golan Heights. Again, this is Palestinian. And there's a lot of turmoil today because the Israelites, the Jews, say this should be our part of us. This is our land. And there's different things that have taken place that has given the Palestinians this area to settle in, especially during the Israeli wars of the 1960s, even as 1970s. There was a lot of wars over here, such as the 7-Day War and all that ended up, they would give, in their treaties, they would give settlements to the Palestinians. So just a big mess. But the point I'm bringing, or the reason I'm bringing this up, is to point out that it basically got its start during the 19th century Zionist movement under Theodore Herzl. Okay, so that's Israel. Next part of this PowerPoint, we're going to move now to Italy. We haven't talked much about Italy. We've been talking a lot about France and then during the French Revolution, but we haven't talked much about Italy. The Congress of Vienna divided control of Italy into two regions of control. Now, Italy was a bunch of city-states or states, and the Congress of Vienna of 1815 basically said we're going to divide it into two and control it this way. Northern Italy will be controlled by Austria, and southern Italy will be controlled by Spain. But as 19th century nationalism spread, the Italians worked to win independence from these foreign rulers, and their goal was to establish the nation of Italy. However, it was not peaceful, and it did delve into revolution. And this was led by two men. Both of these guys had the same first name, Giuseppe Mazzini and Giuseppe Garibaldi. And these were the two guys that kind of headed up this revolt against these foreign rulers. The first one is Giuseppe Mazzini. He was an Italian politician, a journalist, an activist for the unification of Italy. His catchphrase was Italy for Italians. Not very creative, but it was pretty strong, Italy for Italians. He created the Young Italy movement, which attracted discontented revolutionaries and their revolutionary idealists. It attracted these young people. Majority of the people were under the age of 40, so that's why it was called the Young Italy movement. And these young Italians revolted in three separate revolutions, 1820, 1830, and 1848. But they just could not do it. They could not overthrow the foreign rule that was over them, the rule of the Austrians and the rule of the Spanish. They just could not overthrow it. So in steps Giuseppe Garibaldi, and he was a soldier of fortune. In other words, also known as a mercenary. He was a hired soldier. Now, let me say this. A mercenary's definition is a hired soldier who is more concerned with money than with loyalty. Okay? But Garibaldi was different. He was a hired soldier that did have strong nationalistic pride. Okay? So even though he was a mercenary, he was loyal to Italy. So that definition where I say that a hired soldier who is more concerned with money than loyalty, that's just a generic definition of a mercenary. Garibaldi was a hired soldier who was loyal to Italy. Okay, so he led a group called the Red Shirts, obviously, because they wore red shirts. That was their kind of like their trademark. And he led insurrections in southern Italy. And he started out with a 1,000-man army. He swept through Sicily and southern Italy, and he gained many supporters, and he fought using guerrilla warfare. And so guerrilla warfare is basically the opposite of, let's say, two standing armies against one another. Recently, you watched a video on the Battle of Waterloo where you had the Duke of Wellington's forces against Napoleon's forces. You had clear army of the Duke of Wellington, and you have a clear army of of Napoleon Bonaparte. And they faced off and they fought each other, and the Duke of Wellington won the day with the help of the Prussians, and Napoleon's army was beat. Well, guerrilla warfare, there is no, let's say, standing army against standing army. Guerrilla warfare would be people that might not have the conventional weapons of war. They might not have a uniform, even though these guys here wore red shirts. They might not have a uniform. They might not go onto the battlefield standing there as platoons or companies or battalions or brigades or regiments. They might use more of a hit and run tactic. They would attack and then disappear. So this is guerrilla warfare, and this is how Garibaldi fought his revolution in southern Italy. By 1860, Garibaldi had rid southern Italy of all foreign rule and handed all conquered lands to King Emmanuel. Now, King Emmanuel was the first king of the established Italy. Over the next decade, the new monarchy absorbed the remaining lands of Italy to include Venice and Rome. Rome is kind of in the center of Italy, and Venice is more towards the north. So you start seeing Italy really become consolidated into a country. I have a couple of maps here on the screen. This is the first one. This is Italy around 1800. And you can see the different states that make up Italy. And this is before the Congress of Vienna said we're going to divide it into two. Okay. Here's Italy in 1843. Now, it has been basically divided into two to be controlled, even though they're still states. And you can see a little bit of a change. I'm going to go back one. So this is 1800. And then this is 1843. So not a lot has changed, but there's been some revolution, and the control is still there by Spain in the south and by Austria in the north. And then you have 1860. And you can see clearly that we begin to see a kingdom of Italy develop. You have the southern portion is now all consolidated. You have the north now also becoming consolidated. The very far north up here is still controlled by Austria. Okay, so here's Venice. This is the Papal States. And then the last slide here, 1870, is pretty much all now consolidated into the Empire of Italy. Okay, this area up here, which is Venice, that was like the last hold on with Austria. Yeah, Austria's right here next to it. So the last hold on, this is where Venice is. That they finally joined Italy in 1866, and then the Papal States, they ended up joining in 1870. So by 1870, Italy has now become a complete nation with a king. And that's it for 19th Century Nation Building Part 2. I'll see you in a second. All right, class, that's it for today. In our next lecture, we're looking at Nation Building Part 3, where we'll be looking at a bunch of Germanic states that come together and create the German Empire. I'll see you then.